As a member of the Health Liaison Committee, I want to welcome all of you. I'm so glad that you could come to hear the first in a series of speakers, wellness speakers, that will be happening between now and June. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Clair Sexton, who will be presenting material about physical activity and brain health. Clair is a neuroscientist with a long-standing interest in brain health and the various factors that have been proposed that affect brain health, how our brains age, such factors as sleep, late life depression, and the topic today, physical activity. Clair received her undergraduate degree in neuroscience at the University of Manchester in England, following which she worked as a research assistant at the New York State Psychiatric Institute at Columbia University. She completed her doctoral and postdoctoral research at the University of Oxford. She has also worked as a visiting researcher at the University of Oslo. Let us welcome Clair Sexton and hear about physical activity as it affects brain health.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you for the introduction. So as Sarah said, I'm a researcher.
She is.
I have one here. I can move it up. Can you hear? So let's see how. Okay, can you hear it better? Is it better? Will I just hold it? Oh, you can turn it up on the wall. Okay.
No.
That's
fine. Lower.
Sorry. Now, how can you hear? Is that good?
Too loud.
Too loud.
Too loud, too low.
Okay. We're halfway in between.
Oh my God.
Hopefully that's okay.
She's using a microphone.
I've got a microphone on here. Okay, so hopefully you can hear okay. So I'm a researcher at UCSF. I've been there for a year now. I'm on a 2-year program, which is an Atlantic Fellowship for Equity and Brain Health. And it's a really interesting new scheme. So it's been going, it's just entering its 3rd year now, and it brings together all different professionals interested in aging from all over the world. So we have fellows like me from the UK, from the US, from Taiwan, from Japan, from Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Africa, all over. And we all have different interests and different focus. So I'm interested in neuroscience and looking at how the brain ages and what promotes healthy brain aging from quite a scientific standpoint. We also have neurologists and psychiatrists who have a more clinical interest, but then we also have a stand-up comedian who's developing a show about aging. We have architects who are looking at the design of residential homes, and we have lawyers looking at, for example, the cost of care. So we all come together and we receive training on aging and brain aging. And it's been a really great experience bringing us all here in San Francisco, and then also coming out to meet communities like yours. So I thought I'd start off today with one of my favourite statistics about our aging population, and it's estimated that half of all babies born this year in the States will reach 100 years old. So it's quite striking. How many of you would like to live to 100 years old? Okay, so it's maybe 20% of you. When I give these talks to school kids, every single hand goes up. And I'm in that camp. I'm very much an optimist about our aging population and the experience, the skills, the wisdom that older adults offer. But often when I'm giving these talks to audiences of retired people, of older adults, then it's often half of hands go up once no hand went up. And that's because people are mindful of the challenges aging can bring and the importance of living well as well as just living longer. And this is a couple of statistics from the UK, but they're very similar in the US. And that's that life expectancy at 65 years, so when you reach 65 in the UK, that's when you're eligible to receive your state pension. Women are expected to live a further 21 years, so until they're 86, and men a further 19 years. However, healthy life expectancy at 65 years is just 11 years for women and 10 years for men. So it's estimated that around half of time in retirement isn't spent in good or very good health. So I'd like you to imagine for a moment that you're going to live to 100 years old. What sort of factors would be important for you in your lifestyle to kind of promote health and well-being, do you think?
Mobility.
Mobility?
Function of the brain.
Brain function, yeah. Is there anything like that any habits that you would do, any lifestyle factors? Reading, yeah, cognitive stimulation. Diet. Driving, keeping independent. Knitting. Eating, so all sorts of different activities. And here's one model which kind of groups together different factors that help promote health and well-being in retirement. So there's 6 broad categories. So one is fuel. So this is what you're fueling your body with, what you eat, what you drink, what medications you use, whether you smoke or not. Second is movement, and we're going to be talking about that in a minute, just about our physical activity, how we're active, including whether we're doing activities that raise our heart rate, strength activities, flexibility, not being sedentary too much of the time. Rest is the third factor. So then this is time being able to relax and also sleep. Then stimulation, so then this can be cognitive stimulation, so crosswords, Sudoku puzzles, documentaries, talks, but also creativity, so kind of music, art all falls within this factor. A fifth one is relationships, the importance of relationships and social engagement, be that with family, friends, or neighbours and colleagues. And then finally there is security, and this again is quite a broad one, so then it can refer to financial security is important, and also security in terms of housing and in terms of identity. So that can change then if somebody has been working in a certain profession their life, and then when they retire having to adjust and try and form a new identity. So as you can see, all of these are visualized as cogs. So even though each one is important, to get the overall health and well-being, they all need to be moving, and they all influence one another. So the correct diet will give you more energy to be able to be doing physical activity. And then if you're active during the days, then you're increasing the likelihood that you can sleep well at night. So today we'll talk about 2 of those cogs. So one being movement and the role of physical activity, and then I'll touch on the role of sleep as well. So we'll start off with a quiz. What do you think the recommended minimum number of minutes of moderate intensity physical activity is per week for adults over the age of 65?
150.
Okay, so I'll give you some options. That's one of them though, but just for a bit of background, moderate intensity physical activity is anything that raises your heart rate, but you're still able to carry on a conversation while you're doing it. So it's things like brisk walking, or if you went on the stationary cycle in the gym and it was kind of on a lower resistance, that you can feel it raising your heart rate, but it's not that you're completely out of breath doing it. So the options are A, 90 minutes, so that's equivalent to 30 minutes 3 times a week. B, 150 minutes, so that's 30 minutes 5 times a week. C, 210 minutes, which is 30 minutes 7 days a week. Or D, 300 minutes, which is 60 minutes 5 days a week. So who thinks A? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Any takers for B? And quite a lot of you, over half. C? Some of you as well. And D? Okay. So most of you are correct. It is B, 150 minutes per week. So this guideline is the same for all adults from 18 up to no maximum age. So the guidelines for adults and for older adults is the same. And it's 150 minutes per week in moderate intensity exercise as long as you are able to. As long as it's, so it's, if you've got mobility problems or other problems, then this wouldn't be the right level. This number is halved if you're doing more vigorous exercise. So if you're doing the type of exercises which raise your heart rate to such an extent that it is difficult to have a conversation while you're doing them. It's also recommended to do strength exercises on 2 or more days a week. So this doesn't have to be lifting weights, but things like carrying groceries also helps. So I was at a talk last week, and it was one of the kind of major names in physical activity research who's now into her 60s, and she was saying how she has vowed she never, whenever anyone offers to carry something for her, she always says no. And she always parks at the far end of the car park. And she'll go with her nephew shopping, and he'll be like, oh, you have parked at the far end of the car park again, I know what you're doing. And that's her way of just building in small changes to try and keep active in day-to-day life. It's also recommended for older adults to do flexibility exercises on 2 or more days a week. And the reason for this is to help reduce the risk of falling. So meeting these guidelines has been shown to help us live longer. So for example, a review of studies showed that people who met the guidelines or got a little bit over them had a 31% reduced risk of dying in a follow-up period of around 14 years, compared with people who did no activity. People who did 2 or 3 times the guidelines had an even greater reduced risk of mortality at 37%. But what's really interesting here is that people who just did some exercise, so they weren't getting the 150 minutes, but they were getting something more than 0, and they were at a 20% reduced risk. So really just doing something rather than nothing can have a big impact on these health outcomes. But it's not just that physical activity helps us to live longer, but it also helps us to live well. So when we go into schools, we ask the kids to point to a part of their body that exercise is good for, and they can start off, say, with their heart, and then we get them to point to another body part and another body part, because really there's so many benefits to keeping physically active, so that it strengthens our bones, strengthens our muscles, reducing the risk of falls, that it reduces our risk of heart attacks and strokes, that it reduces the risk of certain cancers, including breast cancer. And also there's increasing evidence that it's good for brain health, so reducing the risk of depression, reducing depressive symptoms, and also I'll be talking a little bit more about the links to cognitive health. So some of these benefits you might notice straight away. So you might go to an exercise class, a Zumba class or a dance class, and come back feeling in a better mood. Some of them you might notice when you check up on a measure after a few weeks or a few months, that you might notice, for example, your blood pressure is in the normal range rather than being raised. And for some of them, it's not possible to notice on an individual level. But so, for example, you may be at decreased risk of a certain illness. But because you're not getting that illness, then you don't notice it on the individual level. So some of those benefits are really well established. So the first study looking at cardiovascular health was published in the early 1950s, and that was comparing the people working on the London buses. So they compared the drivers who would spend the whole day sitting down to the instructors, the ticket inspectors, who would be spending the whole time standing up and going between the bottom and the top deck. And they found that the ticket inspectors had reduced risk of heart attacks and reduced risk of dying compared to the drivers. And then they were also able to look and see that this wasn't, they took the measures of the uniforms that they had to see whether it was any difference driven by differences in weight, but it wasn't, it was down directly to their activity levels. So some of these then has been, it's 70 years since these first findings. Other areas of research are more emerging, and for example, the links with cognitive health. So here are two headlines that have been published this year in newspapers in England about the findings between physical activity and dementia. So one of them claims stay fit to blitz outs and says women who stay fit in middle age are 88% less likely to develop dementia, the study claims. Just a couple of months later, there was another headline saying gym fail. Exercise doesn't slow down dementia and might even speed it up. Experts warn. So what type of impact do you think those kind of varying findings would have on a reader?
Confusion.
Confusion?
Discouraging.
Do what you're doing.
Discouraging? Yeah, just to kind of carry on, ignore them and carry on with what you're doing.
Rationalization
Rationalization?
for not exercising.
Yeah.
Fake news.
Yeah, and people can kind of dismiss then what they read and just think, well, I know what's best for me and carry on. Can you think of any reasons why these two studies might have different results? Anything you can tell from the details that are given in these brief headlines?
That one's women and that one's everybody.
Yeah, so then that finding is just in women, and this one doesn't mention if it's men or women, but it is a mix.
Yeah, who's sponsoring it?
Yeah, the health of the sample. So then this study was looking at healthy people in middle age and looking to see who went on to develop dementia. Whereas this study was taking a sample of people who already were living with dementia. Anything else? Or any other detail? What other questions would you have about these studies that you'd want to know about when if you were reading the whole article?
I'd consult my doctor.
You'd consult your doctor, yeah?
See what he would advise for me personally.
Yeah, and that's important that for all of this, then these are studies done on particular populations and not necessarily generalizable to other populations or to individuals.
I'd be curious about what kind of exercise. Exercise doesn't slow it down, but there's exercise and then there's exercise, so I want to know about
Yeah, so what is meant by exercise? So then this study is actually talking about fitness. So they did fitness tests on the women to see how fit they were. That's not exactly the same thing as seeing how active somebody is. Whereas this study then did an intervention. So then they got people who had dementia and weren't very active and gave them over a year-long program of exercises to be doing. So they're looking at quite different things.
size of the sample.
Size of the sample, exactly. So this study was done on quite a large population. I think it was over 1,000 people, but because they were looking at how many people went on to get dementia, it was only around 44 people, I think, in total who got dementia over the course of the study. So then that's still quite a small number of people if you're thinking about it. And this study was done on a few hundred people. But you can see headlines, and when you look, they're done on 7 people. So that's an important thing to keep an eye out for. So I think you've got many of the important factors there. And really, I think how this fits in with the wider literature is that there's strong evidence that keeping physically active reduces the risk of dementia. It may not be up to the 88% claimed in that study, but quite consistently that's been shown, and the most recent reviews have concluded that there's strong evidence to support that. There's more mixed evidence regarding whether starting an exercise program can improve cognition, both for healthy older adults and for people living with dementia. So this is where it's more a bit mixed. Some studies have shown that if you start exercising, it improves your cognition. Some studies have found that it slows the rate of decline. So it's not that it's improving it, but it's staying stable for longer. And then other studies haven't found a difference. So the jury's still out a little on this one, and that's why then you'll see different findings reported in the media, while more studies are being done on larger populations and examining different types of exercise. So a lot of the research has been done looking at aerobic exercise, so raising the heart rate, but more recently then there's been more looking at, it's called dual task exercising, where you're doing 2 things at once. So things like dancing, where you'll be getting your heart rate up, but also engaging your brain. So some researchers are quite optimistic about that when it's particular tailored types of exercise, there's even better cognitive benefits. So what types of activity can we all be doing to benefit our brain health in the short and the long term? So as I said, there's some evidence about aerobic exercise. Some studies claim that this is even better if it's also supplemented with strength exercise. There's all these dual task exercises where you're also doing something cognitively challenging. But basically, when you ask physical activity researchers what's the best activity, the best activity for you is the one that you're going to do regularly. The best activity isn't walking if you hate walking. If you don't like swimming and getting your hair wet, it's not swimming. It's finding the right activity. And here is some examples from a film, The Age of Champions, which is about the Senior Olympics, about people who found the right sport for them. So this is Roger in red. He's 100 years old. And this is adult. He's training to break the pole vault record for the over 80s. Now these ladies' basketball teams, then there's the skill, there's also the muscle component of the game for them and the social component. So they get a few... that's not necessarily the one that's recommended for brain health, but it's something that they all find important, and the bonding between them all. So those types of activities are suitable for those individuals. They're not suitable for everyone. And also, what's suitable for people varies from individual to individual. And it also varies as we get older, and it also varies if we're living with a disease. So, for example, for somebody living with dementia, what types of activities they enjoy, what types of activities are suitable, may change over time. So, for example, would you say a seated exercise class would be suitable for someone living with dementia? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. So seated exercise classes are very popular, and one of the exercises that we can do now is if you, with your right hand, draw lines up and down, Okay? And then stop, and then with your left hand, draw triangles. Okay? And now, start at the top, and lines and triangles at the same time. Okay. So you can see that those types of exercises, they can be done standing up, they can be done sitting down. They're increasing the kind of upper body mobility. They're engaging the brain. They're getting the left and the right sides of the brain working together. They can be done to music. They can be done to groups. And then if you practice that a few times, then you do get better at it. So these are some types of exercise suitable for people living with dementia. How about whitewater rafting? Would that be suitable?
Only if you wanted to get rid of them.
Okay, so here we have a clip from the UK charity Dementia Adventure. So they run holidays for people living with dementia and their caregivers. And here we have 2 people living with dementia in the boat, along with centre staff and volunteers from Dementia Adventure. So this happened when there was 2 ladies who had living with dementia, and they were firm friends. One of them had been to see her doctor and had been told that it was no longer safe for her to be going out walking by herself anymore, because there was too big a danger of her getting lost and not being able to find her way back home. She came home from that appointment, and you can just imagine how hearing that news feels. And she had got a call from her friend, and her friend had said, "Oh, you know, I've always wanted to go whitewater rafting, what do you think of it?" She said, "Sure, whatever, I'll go for it." And they got in contact with Dementia Adventure. Dementia Adventure looked into it, went to a whitewater rafting centre, trained up their staff, did all the risk assessments, and made it happen. And these are part of week-long holidays where people can try out activities like this or like zip wiring, but a lot of the time people, you know, don't want to be doing that, and they prefer to be taking more the kind of leisurely walks and the yoga classes, which are often offered as well. But it goes just to demonstrate that there's a wide variety of activities that are suitable. It's all very individualised. So for some people it might just be a gentle seated exercise class, but if you're someone who's always enjoyed adventurous activities, then with the right support, then it's still possible to continue these activities as you get older, and as you live with a disease, you know, obviously taking care to note with what is suitable might change as time goes on. So despite the benefits of physical activity to health, and despite there being a range of different services available, physical inactivity levels increase with age. So this is the proportion of people who get fewer than 30 minutes per week of moderate intensity exercise. So you can see that for teenagers and people in their 20s and early 30s, it's around 15 to 20% of people don't meet this 30 minutes per week level. And then this increases, and it gets up to around half of people in their late 70s and early 80s, and then over 70% of people over 85. And these types of figures, these inactivity figures, they're generally higher amongst women. They're higher amongst people with low socioeconomic status, and they're also higher among people with disabilities. So what types of reasons do you think can stop somebody being active as they grow older? Mobility, yep.
Pain.
Weather.
Fear. Depression, yeah. There's a range of factors. And then some researchers have done investigations into what types of attitudes and what factors are stopping people from being active. And one of the groups of people they identified were people who had kind of think my active days are in the past. Would you agree with this?
No.
Okay. Another group of people just say, I'm just not interested. It may be that they have other interests, they're more interested in creative exploits, they're more interested in cognitive stimulation. Physical activity, I'm just not interested. Is this something you can relate to?
No.
No?
Yes.
Some of you?
Yes.
Another group of people say, my life keeps me active enough. So you can be going about, walking to the shops, coming back, kind of on your feet, but without doing any of the vigorous activity, moderate or vigorous activity that raises the heart rate, which is associated with the health gains. Fourth group of people cite emotional and practical barriers. So then this might be associated with the environment. So some areas are a lot are more walkable than other areas. So if you're in an area which isn't very safe, you're less likely to be going out walking it. If the sidewalks aren't well maintained, then you're less likely to be going out. So there may be practical barriers like that, and there may be emotional barriers of somebody not feeling able to. And then there's a final group of people, and I often fall in this category, that know the benefits of exercise, positive about doing activity, enjoy activity, and then somehow aren't doing enough of it for some unclear reason. So have you got any advice that you would give to anybody who would be falling in any of these groups, do you think?
Go to an exercise class.
Go to an exercise class, yeah, so maybe build it in something social.
Get a trainer.
Get a trainer, yep, and you can be setting goals. That works for some people. That then there's programs you can do, like Couch to 5K, to be walking 5 kilometers after 10 weeks, just gradually bringing it up.
Go to balance classes and Tai Chi classes, because balance is quite an issue in the older population.
Yep, balance and Tai Chi, and there's a study just out this week saying that Tai Chi is as good as the kind of exercise classes for reducing risk of falling. So there's all sorts of things. So then it's, again, just finding the right activity that's right for a person and providing the right support for them. So just to summarise this part of the talk, then the guidelines for aerobic activity for adults over 65 years are 150 minutes per week of moderate activity. And it's also recommended to do activities that build strength and balance. The physical activity benefits health in both the short and the long term. The physical activity is for everyone. Not necessarily the 150 minutes per week, but some type of activity at some level should be suitable. And also that something is better than nothing.
Yeah.
So next part of this talk, just like to talk a little bit about the role of sleep. But before I move on, is there any questions on that part, on physical activity? Yep.
What would your definition of the target zone be? Like, is it still 220 less your age, and then between 60 and 80%?
Yeah, exactly. So the question was about the target heart rate zone. So yeah, your maximum heart rate is 220 minus your age. So your maximum heart rate goes down as you get older, so you're not aiming for the same targets that you could have been aiming for in your 20s or 30s. And yes, aerobic training zone, which is then when you're increasing the heart rate, is between 60 and 80%, so you can monitor it with that.
You talked about 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. Is 30 minutes a day better than, say, 50 minutes on 3 days a week?
Yeah.
Okay, so then the question, if you heard it about, is whether it should be 30 minutes a day 5 times a week, or could you do 10 minutes a go or an hour? And the guidelines are changing this year. There's going to be a new set of guidelines out, the 2018 guidelines for Americans. And the scientific report has been published. The guidelines aren't out yet, but the scientific report changes. Because Previously, it was saying that exercise should be done in bouts of 10 minutes or more. But these ones are saying, no, it doesn't matter. If you're doing it in half an hour, 5 minutes, it all counts. And the evidence for that has come from studies which then use Fitbits and use watches. So they're better able to then look at when people are doing activity and when people are doing just very short bouts of exercise. And there's no evidence that exercising has to be a minimum length for it to be beneficial. So yeah, the latest, we'll see what the final report says, but the latest thinking is that it doesn't really matter what length of exercise you're doing in a particular time. Take one more.
Who's responsible for that report?
So that is a federal government report. It's not CDC, but they feed into it. Yes. Yes. So then they have the scientific report. So they got together all the experts from across the country, and they did all the different domains. So cancer, cognitive health, sleep. They come up with the 115 minutes. They put those recommendations to the government, and then the government come up with their recommendations. We expect that the recommendations closely follow the scientific report, but that's not always the case. So for example, there's dietary guidance out recently, and that was claiming the scientific guidance said there shouldn't be recommendations based on cholesterol. The guidance, the official government guidance, then said reduce your cholesterol. So there can be, we'll see how closely the physical activity report is to the scientific report. Okay, so I'll move on just to the role of sleep. Okay.
When you talk about strength, do they divide that all into upper body, lower body?
Usually it's just overall that it's looked at strength, overall strength rather than upper or lower. Okay, so next I'll talk a bit about the role of sleep. So how many people here would say they don't sleep as well as they used to? Yeah, and so it's around half of you, and that's pretty much what all the studies are showing, that it's around half of people over the age of 60 report some types of problem with their sleep. So then this could be having trouble getting to sleep. It could be waking up during the night and not being able to get back to sleep. It could be waking up too early in the morning and again not being able to get back to sleep. Or it could be waking up in the morning and not feeling kind of refreshed by sleep. Now, for a diagnosis of insomnia to be made, then there needs to be a predominant complaint of dissatisfaction with sleep quantity or sleep quality. And this is for 2 weeks or more, and your doctor would go through a questionnaire and look at how your sleep is affected to see if it meets the clinical criteria for insomnia. The doctor would also be looking to see whether these sleep problems cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, educational, academic, behavioural or other important areas of functioning. So in other words, insomnia is defined by its nighttime symptoms, by the dissatisfaction with sleep quality or sleep quantity, but also by its daytime symptoms. So impaired functioning during the day as a result of not sleeping well at night. And impaired concentration and impaired memory are two of the most common reasons that people give for how sleep impairs their daytime functioning. So people report things like, you can't think straight, you can't think the same. So this will be things like somebody will be filling in a form and then they'll write down their daughter's date of birth instead of their own date of birth. Or they'll read a page of the book and then realise they've got to go over and reread it because they didn't take in the information the first time round. And these types of cognitive complaints then they contribute to reduced work performance in adults who are working, and also they're a key driver for people to go and seek treatment. So there's been studies then that look at, experimental studies to look at the effects of sleep on cognition as a result of these types of reports. So some of them have been observational, so taking a group of people who have insomnia and comparing them to people who sleep well. And the people with insomnia self-report for memory, and cognition, but actually their tests on a lot of the cognitive tests remain about the same. Sometimes they're a bit slower to react, but in other tests they're just as good. Other studies then have looked at the relationship between sleep and cognitive health by depriving people of sleep. So they'll get people either into a sleep lab, or they'll give them instructions for when they're at home and to go without sleep or have very reduced sleep for 24 to 48 hours. And these studies have shown quite strongly that if you're sleep deprived, then how you perform on cognitive tests is reduced. Your measures of attention go down, your measures of memory go down, so they give people word lists and see how many words they can remember. Also, what's called the executive functioning is reduced. So executive functioning is tasks which are multitasking. So things like if I gave you a 6-digit phone number, and then I asked you to repeat it back to me in the backwards order. That would be, you'd be using your executive function for that, because you'd be retaining that information and trying and working on it to repeat it back. So all of those, if you have a night or two's deprived sleep, your performance in all those tests are reduced. What we were interested in looking at in the DISCO study was, stands for defining the impact of improved sleep on cognition, is whether improving people's sleep can improve their cognition. And interestingly, there's been about more than 70 studies looking at if depriving people of sleep makes their cognition worse. There's only been, I think ours is the third, looking at whether improving sleep can make people's cognition better. So how did we try and improve people's sleep? So we used an online program which is called Sleepio, and it's a program of cognitive behavioural therapy. So people log into their computer and they get asked about their sleep patterns, so that what time they went to sleep, when they woke up, whether they woke up during the night. And then each week, for 6 weeks, they have a different module that they watch and go through. So these modules cover various topics, so it includes thoughts. So the racing mind when some people get when they go to sleep, which prevents them from relaxing and going to sleep. Their schedule. So what's quite common is something that people spend more time in bed as they get older, but less of the time in bed asleep. So it can be limiting the time in bed and then having a greater proportion of time in bed asleep. So instead of going to bed at 9 and getting up at 9, but only spending 5 hours asleep, then it can be going to bed at midnight, getting up at 7 in the morning and spending 6 of those hours asleep. So it's been that type of sleep restriction. Looks at lifestyle, so when to have caffeinated drinks and not having them before going to bed. Also increasing activity levels, which can help sleep. And also bedroom settings, so kind of taking out TVs and gadgets, especially if you wake up in the middle of the night, not switching on the TV and staying awake watching something. So it goes through all of these types of factors, and it comes up with a kind of personalised recommendations for when to be going to bed and when to be getting up. So what we did was we recruited people who self-reported poor sleep and met the criteria for insomnia, and also reported problems with their cognition and their memory. We got them all to do assessments of their sleep and of their cognition. And then half of them we just put on a waiting list. And the other half we gave this digital cognitive behavioural therapy for insomnia, so the Sleepio program. After 10 weeks, we asked everyone to complete the same assessments again, looking at their sleep, looking at their cognition. The waitlist group, we asked them just to carry on waiting a bit longer, and then the people who did the Sleepio program, we just followed them up just to see how they were getting on. And then at week 24, they all had another set of assessments on their sleep and cognition. And after those assessments, then we gave the waiting list group access to Sleepio as well. So we looked at the Insomnia Severity Index for sleep, which is a questionnaire just asking about the types of factors we've talked about. And we also looked at sleep efficiency, which is the proportion of time in bed spent asleep. So again, it's if you spend 8 hours, if you're in bed for 10 hours and you're asleep 8 of the hours, you'd have a measure of 80%. For cognition, then we use the British Columbia Cognitive Complaints Inventory. So this asks people to rate their problems with concentration, memory, and thinking skills over 7 days. So they'd say either not at all, some, quite a bit, or very much. How much they had forgetfulness and memory problems, poor concentration, trouble expressing thoughts, trouble finding the right word, a slow thinking speed, and trouble figuring things out or solving problems. So these are all things that all of us can relate to at some time or another to various extents. And this is what we found. So these are new results. So we recruited 410 people to take part in this study and divided them into the two groups. Over 80% of them altogether stayed in the study for the week 10 assessments, and then it was over two-thirds of them completed the whole study. On average, they were around 50 years old, but people ranged in their 20s up until their 80s. 3/4 of the participants were women, and sleep problems are more commonly reported in women than in men. It was quite a well-educated sample, so over half had a university degree, and over 60% had depressive symptoms as well. So for their sleep, this is the score on the Insomnia Severity Index, and this is in our control group. So it started off around 18, which is quite severe, and stayed around the same range over the study. And then this is how it changed in the intervention group. So these people started off as severe, and then it went down to mild symptoms after they did the online program, and then it maintained mild at the final follow-up. Similarly for sleep efficiency, to begin with it was 60% of time spent in bed was spent asleep, and this increased up to over 80% in the intervention group by the end of the study. And for cognition, so most people in the control group, the waiting list group, it was around a score of 9, which is moderate cognitive complaints. It started off similar in the intervention group, but there was a significant decrease. So it was only mild or sub-threshold even for some people symptoms by the end of the study. And again, this was really interesting that this was after the end of the online program. This was 14 weeks later that there was still those improvements were maintained. So to summarise this, then cognitive complaints are a common feature of insomnia, and our study indicated that digital cognitive behavioural therapy for insomnia can improve sleep and self-reported cognition. Obviously, it's important then for these findings to be replicated by other studies. Okay, so any questions?
Was there a follow-up study 2 years later, for instance?
No, not for this one. So we've just finished collecting this data a few months ago. And there isn't a longer follow-up for this because we wanted just to see whether it was effective at all. So in future studies, now we've shown that it has the effect, then we can see for longer how long it's maintained. And right at the back, in the corner.
No, I have the mic here.
Oh.
I have the mic.
Oh, you have the mic there, okay.
A bunch of us probably use sleep apnea machines. What impact at all would that have on the study, or did you study that?
So we didn't include anyone with who used sleep apnea machines in this study, but other studies have looked at sleep apnea machines and have found them to be very beneficial for different cognitive measures. So I think they're recommended for a wide range of reasons.
Can you describe digital cognitive behavioral therapy?
Yes. So then that was the program. People would log into the website. They'd log in every day and put in their sleep times, and then they'd do the online tutorials. So that was going through those factors that I mentioned. So the racing thoughts at night, how to deal with that, how to relax, how to have the bedroom settings conducive to sleep, removing gadgets, increasing activity during the day, watching caffeine intake. So the cognitive behavioral therapy just goes through all of these types of factors, relates them to insomnia, so people can make changes both to their cognition, so for example trying to relax with the racing thoughts, and to their behaviour. So for example, with regard to caffeinated drinks, what they have. And most often it can be done in different settings. So it can be done on a one-on-one basis over a course. It can be done in a group setting. But this was done digital. So people would go online and they'd watch videos which would take them through this process. It's also available as books.
But how do you reduce that business of too much thought going on? How do they take care of that?
So that's kind of they have like a whole 20-minute session about that. And I'm not somebody who administers the cognitive behavioral therapy, so I'm not quite sure, but they have different techniques to just kind of calm the mind, and kind of mindfulness techniques as well, so they could be used in those types of things. More detail, I'm afraid I don't know.
Is there an ideal number of hours for seniors to sleep?
So there are, the National Sleep Foundation give recommendations, which is between 6 and 8 hours per night for older adults. Now these studies, these recommendations aren't based upon cognitive outcomes, but they're based upon, links with other health outcomes. So in general, too short sleep, so 5 hours or less, is harmful, that it increases risk of dementia, it increases risk of mortality, but also too long sleep has been associated with bad outcomes as well. So if you're getting 10 hours of sleep, that's usually a sign that there's something else might be going on. So kind of in the middle is what's recommended. But again, it's important to find what's right for an individual. And other studies traditionally have just been looking at a set number of hours. There have been some studies then which look into the idea of sleep credit. So it asks people, how many hours of sleep do you think you need a night? And then if you might have somebody who says, I need 6 hours of sleep, they get 6 hours of sleep, and that's good for them. And that would be very different to then somebody saying, I need 8 hours of sleep a night, and they're only getting 6. So at the moment, the recommendations are between 6 and 8 hours. As we go forward, it might be that there can be more kind of personalised guidance, and there can be more guidance based upon cognitive literature.
What is considered in this enough sleep? Most of us get up during the night to pee,
Yeah.
twice. And is that considered uninterrupted if you just return back and go back to sleep?
Yeah, that's fine. Kind of getting up to use the bathroom, coming back and going back to sleep. That's all considered normal. It's then if you're getting up and then you're awake for another hour after that, not able to get back to sleep, that's where it's more problematic.
I want to know, at the beginning of your talk, how many minutes should one spend on activity during the week? Did you say 150 or am I wrong?
Yeah, 150. That was right. That's the recommendation for kind of population levels, and that's what countries judge how active their nation is. It's not necessarily what's right for every single individual. So 150 minutes is the general guidance, but you've got to kind of find the level which is right for you. And
could be a goal.
It could be a goal, yeah.
Bob? Yeah.
Do you have any data? Do you have any data about diet and sleep, or how soon you should eat, how much time you should sleep? In other words, should you eat and then go to sleep? Or
Yeah, no, I don't think it's.
not have?
There's not so much that I've read. I don't think it's recommended to be having a big meal and then going to sleep straight away. But it's not an area that I've seen much published on looking at that in particular. Caffeine, yes. So then definitely try and not to be having caffeine in the evenings. And that can be beneficial. But again, people will find different levels. So some people can have coffee at 3 in the afternoon and be fine. Other people, then that could still affect them. But definitely kind of cutting down caffeine in the evenings if you do have sleep problems.
What are your ideas on why there are more sleep problems in women than in men?
Yeah, so the question was about more sleep problems in women than men. And I'm not sure, actually. That's a good question.
We worry.
Does anyone have any thoughts? Self-reporting. So that's one thing that women can sometimes be more likely to admit to having problems. Also, women tend to be to volunteer for research studies more as well, which is why we have more women in that.
When you say that you recommend between 6 and 8 hours a night to sleep, what if you have someone who, say, naps during the afternoon? Can that be added on to the 6 to the 8 hours? Will that count?
No, so they're not 6 to 8 hours at night. Yeah.
But what about naps? I noticed that our time is just coming to an end. So I want to extend appreciation to you from all of us. And perhaps we might take a moment afterward if people have some additional question they would like to ask.
Yeah, I'm happy to stay and answer questions if people want to come up.
Thank you very much.